So I'm very excited to be here today. I wanted to share some thoughts with you about the future of virtual in physical space. Now, when we think about virtual, oftentimes you think about occluding the senses. You put these masks on, you can't see anything. If you've seen these embarrassing videos of people, they bump into things. I've been at conferences where people use amazing tools, and yet it sort of feels odd because people are actually divorced from this physical world that we inhabit. The virtual that I'm talking about is the virtual that all of us swim in and have been swimming in for centuries and millennia. It's the virtual of ideas and communication, of design, of what we use as the medium for all of our work every day. This physical space has importance for me personally because it was literally on this spot while I was waiting for a subway train that I was surveying all of the New Yorkers. This about 10, 11 years ago. And I was thinking about a pitch that I was working on for the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Now, to put it in context, my firm was tiny at that time. We were literally 3 people. It seemed literally absurd that we got this chance to pitch this, museum of a lifetime. And yet, I was looking at these people on the platform and thinking to myself, if we make an ordinary museum, a typical museum, where a historian, a curator will tell you about New York City, what are all these people on the subway platform going to say? Right? These are New Yorkers who literally lived through 9/11. There were 10,000 people who ran out of the burning buildings to save their own lives. Now, I had spent a lot of time up until now thinking about how to make museums and projects as platforms. We had done this project, StoryCorps, which is a national oral histories project that we launched with Dave Isay, where people would go into these soundproof booths, they would interview each other, you would leave with a copy of a recording of your grandmother or of your neighbor, and it would go both into the Library of Congress, and then you would get a copy as well. I'll just play you a couple of excerpts so you get a chance to hear what these interviews are like.
We took off, and as we were ascending, before we had leveled off, our level off point was 45,000 feet. So before we had leveled off, Pedro began leaving us. And the beauty about it is that I believe that there's something after life. You can see it in Pedro.
See, the thing of it is, I always feel guilty when I say I love you to you, and I say it so often. I say it to remind you that as dumpy as I am, it's coming from me. It's like hearing a beautiful song from a busted old radio. And it's nice of you to keep the radio around the house.
So this is the ring that my father gave to my mother, and we can leave it there. And he saved up, and he purchased this, and he proposed to my mother with this. And so I thought that I would give it to you so that he could be with us for this also. So I'm going to share a mic with you right now, Deborah. Where's the right finger? Deborah, will you please marry me?
Yeah, of course. I love you.
Mwah. So kids, this is how your mother and I got married, in a booth in Grand Central Station with my father's ring. My grandfather was a cab driver for 40 years, used to pick people up here every day, so it seems right.
I once heard StoryCorps described by a blogger as a conspiracy to make all of America cry every morning because it gets played on the radio. And so we had this experience with StoryCorps, seeing how ordinary stories could reveal literally the poetry of our experiences. And we started thinking about the 9/11 Memorial Museum and connecting the dots and thinking, well, wait a minute, if we have all of these people, literally a third of the world, who watched 9/11 on that day, and we have such a sense of shared experience between New Yorkers, and we have a sense of aversion to having a historian tell us about 9/11, what if we made a museum that was much more like StoryCorps than something that's typically fixed in place, meaning a platform, a place where visitors can tell their own stories? And I'm going to share something. I rarely do this. I'm just going to show you the fly-through that we used to actually win the original project. So we have a huge piece of steel in the center, and this is actually part of the original building itself. So they're massive artifacts that they asked us to look at. But what we were interested in the fly-through is both to show, A, that you could use these artifacts in an atypical way. Here we're hanging part of the steel as if you're looking at the building. but that we would contrast that with quotes, direct oral histories from people who lived through those experiences. So you can see this is a timeline on the floor, and if you can read that, that says, like a waterfall, thousands of panes of glass shattering. And the idea that you could extract and share the poetry of our experience through these histories and memories was a core part of the approach to the museum. It would essentially be almost like an archaeological space, and you can literally see the box beam columns that made up the original World Trade Center. And you can see these moments in time, you can see these date stamps, but then you also hear from people what it was literally like to be on the site at that time. And so we talked with the museum during the pitch process, and we said, if you try and make a standard museum, we think that people will reject it. But if you make something that has the artifacts but allows people to literally tell their own stories on top of the artifacts, it'll feel like a place that all New Yorkers have a sense of ownership over, and that when people visit from around the world, they'll have that feeling of authenticity. They'll understand that this is a place that isn't someone telling us about museums and history. It'll be a place, almost a collection of memories, and people can gather and share them, a communal space. Now, I worked on this project for 8 years. We did the original master plan, then we designed all the museum exhibits, then we ended up producing all of the media as well. So it's an incredibly long journey. But when you look at that original initial idea, and you think about how far it had to travel through all those years and all of that work, this is actually the original slurry wall. This wall withstood the pressure of the Hudson River for a full year after the event itself. And as we looked at this artifact and we built that museum year by year, we kept thinking about this opening day, and one day, of course, it arrived. And President Obama stood right there in front of that slurry wall, and this is what he said. He said, "Here we will tell their story so that generations yet unborn will never forget. Of coworkers who led others to safety, passengers who stormed a cockpit, our men and women in uniform who rushed into an inferno." And it gave me chills to hear him literally speak back that original idea that we had, that this would be a container for these stories and for these memories. And just understanding that we had traveled in such a far distance, because when we started out, we made this pitch to the museum, but frankly, once we started developing it with them, they actually got very, very gun-shy. They said, well, wait a minute, where have people done this before? We said, nobody's done this before. And they were like, that's terrible. Right? Nobody who feels the weight of the world on their shoulders with the project they're developing is excited to break new ground, particularly on a project with incredible political pressures and incredible constraints. And so what we said was, like a typical designer, we're the experts. This is going to be beautiful. We promise you this will be great. And these people, super smart, working incredibly hard, were like, yeah, we don't believe you. What else do you have? And we developed a process in-house at that moment. We said, you know what? We really believe in this idea. We're just going to actually build a prototype of it. And this is actually what it looked like. We had this idea that we would build a world map. We would project these different memories onto it. And it would be the first thing that you see when you walk in. You wouldn't actually hear from a curator that a third of the world had watched 9/11 live. You'd experience it. And we made this piece, and they actually got it. They were like, oh, we understand. We see that the words work in this different way. Now, on any intense project, there's always somebody who's like, well, I don't think it'll work because of X. The type is too small, or I can't read it, or there's too many languages. And we would just change it on the spot. We would essentially be able to iterate and change our designs to make sure that they were working. And through this prototype, we had literally 40 days of different people going through, stakeholder after stakeholder, family members, members from the state, from the city, from the government, members of the board, historians. And by the end of that, we had so much buy-in, we went to the next level. We made a large-scale prototype. This is in a warehouse 2 years before we opened. And we started getting the actual stories themselves. And then when we finally got on site, everyone was completely confident this would work. Not because they had taken our word for it, but because they had seen it and they had had a chance to change it and iterate and evolve it. This is actually what you see when you first go into the museum. It's a gallery that we call We Remember, and essentially embodies this moment of global witness.
On the day of September 11th, 2001.
On September 11th.
September 11th.
I was in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Cairo, Egypt.
des Champs-Élysées à Paris.
In college at UC Berkeley.
I was in Times Square.
São Paulo do Brasil.
Estaba in Miami, Florida.
Scottish Highlands.
We were actually in a meeting when someone barged in and said,
Oh my God, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Trying to frantically get to a radio.
When I heard it over the radio.
And we had this experience over and over again. Lots of times we would prototype things that the museum, unbeknownst to us, already knew that they didn't like. In fact, we had this idea where we were going to take this World Trade Center steel. This is from a shipping space outside of the airport in New York City, filled with just 1% of the steel. And we said, we want to project different images and memories on top of it. And this is actually from that projection space. In this case, they reversed themselves, and they said, wow. I mean, the director literally said to me, I actually thought in my head that this would feel sort of artificial and uncomfortable, but this feels like the memories are being lifted out. There were lots of prototypes that we built where the director said, this is fantastic. Now I know I really don't like your idea. And that's okay too, because you continue to move forward and you've at least had that honest conversation. But when you walk through the museum today, you will see this idea. We call it, in parlance, the sort of blue text, these original quotes spread throughout the museum. So we have original artifacts that we have these direct quotes on, and you're finding the way in which these personal voices, these moments of poetry, are embedded throughout the museum. There's a range of different experiences. This is the memorial exhibition that shows the range of people, the lives that were lost. And again, you have the capacity to add your own stories if you knew any of these people, or to bring up any individual and to hear about their lives. We have this experience, which uses an algorithm to look through 3 million news articles every single night. And it reconstitutes the exhibition based on today's headlines. So it's essentially building these timelines from 9/11/2001 to today, and showing you how events in the Middle East, in the State Department, with the Department of Defense, in presidential elections, in many ways actually ladder all the way back to 9/11/2001. We have this exhibition which allows people to actually record their own thoughts and their own reflections on 9/11. This was particularly important to us because while you can hear Bill Clinton talk, and he says amazing things about 9/11 itself, we feel it's also important for visitors to be able to share their own experiences and to think for themselves, yes, how is it that you can think about 9/11 today? I'm just going to jump through these. This experience also allows visitors to express themselves, and it's the final one in the museum. This allows you to actually write your own experience about 9/11 on that day, and then to see it projected onto the slurry wall in exactly the same narrative map that you began the museum with. It's essentially the way to close out the experience by allowing people from literally all around the world, and they're encouraged to write in their own language, to experience and to share what they feel and think about 9/11 today. What's really amazing, I think, is that the museum went from this place of incredible fear and anxiety, completely justified, about what would happen if we just let people write anything they want and project it inside of our museum. And these are real fears. And they moved from there to a place where they suddenly recognized, wait a minute, we have a story and a space of importance, and people who come here want to honor that memory. If we make a space where people can write their own messages, project them directly, share with other visitors, you only knit that community. You build that community together. I'll never forget the morning where I got a panicked call from the museum. They had gotten 17 messages in Arabic. And you can see from the system it's not text-based, so they couldn't do an auto-translate. When they finally got the translations, the messages were so incredibly beautiful, they asked the individuals to come back and also write them in English so everyone could share in them. I actually just snapped these literally with my iPhone. My father came home from work that day in a dusty suit. I thank God he came home at all. I miss you both every day. Love, Dad and Chris. And the messages themselves embody this way in which, if you trust your visitors, if you share the microphone with them, if you allow them to express themselves and what's meaningful to them, they'll rise to the occasion and lift everyone with them. During the time that we were also working on the museum, we were asked to look at the memorial. Now, Michael Arad had come up with this design, inverted pools, and he had this amazing idea where he said, you know, this is not a war memorial, it's a terrorism memorial. The names and the arrangement shouldn't feel logical. They shouldn't feel orderly, right? It should have a sense of randomness, which is really one of the defining factors of that day. The challenge was for first responders, meaning firefighters, police officers, it kind of is like a war memorial. They came to work on that day as an act of service. And so there was an incredible epic battle between the foundation, stakeholders, designers. I mean, this is very, very typical in these heightened public arenas. But a negotiation was met and an idea was had. And the idea was, well, wait a minute, what if we looked at the arrangement in a way to express some of the meaningful relationships between the people? We were actually involved at that point to write this algorithm with the artist Jer Thorpe, which literally takes all of this data between all of the next of kin. You can see these different colored groups from location, and they asked us to basically arrange the names themselves based on what are called meaningful adjacencies. And it's amazing because you can see those different green lines. Those are literally requests from different next of kins asking one individual to be located next to the other. And we ran the algorithm literally 42 times, honing it each time, finally solved literally each individual request. And when you go to the memorial today, this piece of software gives you the general arrangement between the 8 different locations, the 4 flights, the 2 towers. And you can obviously search for any individual or group, in this case, Cantor Fitzgerald, which was the largest employer at that time. But more importantly, inside of each of these units and people are stories and histories. So Victor Wald and Harry Ramos didn't know each other until that day. They met in the stairwell going down. And Harry promised Victor, he said, we're going to go down together. And as friends from the buildings came down and said, no, you have to come with us, one said to the other, no, we're going to go down together. We've decided we're going to go down together. And those stories then went down and they filtered out to the families. And when the families heard about that, they made the request that these 2 names be located next to each other in the memorial. And that's just one of literally thousands and thousands of stories that are embedded throughout that memorial, all of which reveal the latticework of human meaning inside of each of these lives and inside of the entire event. Now, when we think about these ideas, these amazing, incredible ideas, particularly I know when I've been in the audience witnessing these incredible designers who have these finished projects, you think to yourself, well, that's great, but where does that come from, right? How do you develop these concepts? And so, this is sort of a classic quote, genius is 1% inspiration, 99% inspiration from the American inventor Edison. I actually like the corollary better, which I found when I was doing research for this. This is the second part of the quote. Accordingly, a genius is often merely a talented person who has done all of his or her homework, right? And first of all, the thing I love is this is 100 years ago, and he says his or her, so that's awesome. But also beyond that, this idea that it's about the work, it's about doing your homework, it's about actually making the work happen, and that there's a process to it. And so I wanted to share both a sort of range of our work and then go through that process quickly and give you a sense of how that happens. So local projects is about 75 people. We're 14 years old. This is our work for the Cleveland Museum of Art. We're well known for reinventing forms, particularly within museums. This interface allows you to see 4,000 artworks at the same time, every single work that's on display, and more importantly, make different connections. So you can see the artworks, you can actually load them onto your iPad or onto your phone. You're essentially authoring your own tour to the museum, which you can then share with anyone. So it's essentially, again, the museum is a platform, and you are able to promote and to use that brand or vehicle for your own expression, which makes it much more important to you because you're personally excited to share it. We like to put visitors at the center of experiences. This is one of the crazier ideas we've ever had. This is a facial detection algorithm that matches you with an artwork. So as you make different faces, we'll bring off these different artworks and bring people together and match you and send you off in the galleries to see them. It really transforms the galleries, right? It makes it social. It makes it performative. We're really interested in the ways that, again, that physical and virtual sit together. So this is our work for the National Museum of American Jewish History, a media sculpture that tells the story of immigrants who moved to America. Or this piece, which is at the top of the World Trade Center. We were asked to look at how we could augment storytellers inside of that space. So we built this enormous ring that has 100 different data feeds. It's completely gesture controlled. So you can basically gather together any information from the city that sits below your feet and share it with the audience in real time. So it's a sort of performative digital stage that you stand inside of and that you're able to create new narratives each time you talk to someone new. our interest in essentially looking at the virtual and physical goes between these types of interfaces and then this piece, which we just did for the Tech Museum. This is for a very complicated subject, synthetic biology. This is in Silicon Valley in California. And so the engineering level is very, very high there, but it also needs to work for 4-year-olds. So we said, well, what if we made a space where visitors could actually cobble together DNA and build it like a bunch of Tinker Toys, creating a virtual organism that you then shoot into a pool to compete with everyone else's organisms. It's essentially a way to understand synthetic biology by actually doing it. And that's a core part of how we think, is that people learn by doing. That's how humans just are. This is a piece that deals with camouflage in different animals. Alan Turing, the famous scientist who created the computer, actually in his spare time, and I'm not making this up, came up with incredible diffusion algorithms that had yet to be put in place. So we actually dug them up and created this exhibition with that. And then the third part of the exhibit is probably one of the craziest things we've ever done. It's a wet lab where you're literally authoring new organisms on the spot. So these Petri dishes are filled with live DNA, and you can literally cut and paste them. And we have a projected interface that walks you through the complicated steps to essentially cook and build these new organisms on the spot. And then you get to watch them grow over a number of days and weeks online. The ways in which we look at architecture in particular really inform our interfaces and our experiences. This next project is from Target, also in California, in Silicon Valley. It's called Open House, and it looks at the Internet of Things. It essentially allows us to understand how these different products might connect together in the most friendly fashion. So it's a lab that teaches Target about how these products interact with consumers, which then also gets shared with the entrepreneurs and inventors who are creating the future in San Francisco. But our job was to make it so simple and so friendly, but also so arresting that you could understand, oh, I get it, so these different products just talk to each other. Or you might have a new bedtime ritual based on these products. Something very, very simple, very, very friendly. Or that you could just walk around and these products would just tell you a little bit about themselves, just share with you how they're going to make your life just a little bit better. We really wanted to sort of diminish all of the hype around Internet of Things and just explain to people, you know, at its core, we just want people to be engaged, and we just want people to understand that the Internet of Things is a simple way that your life will just get a little bit better. I'm going to jump through this. Sorry, this slide came through again. Apologies. And then lastly, this piece. We did this with the architect Bjarke Ingels, if you know him. And we were essentially commissioned by the Times Square Alliance to create a light sculpture in the middle of Times Square. It's a very simple interface. Essentially, as you place your hand on it, it beats in resonance with your beating heart. And as more people gather together with it, more people are able to be connected through a mixture of all of their different beating hearts. So it's a way to make a communal experience in the heart of this incredible media overload that is Times Square. So with that sort of quick overview, I'm just going to go through 3 projects that will give you some sense of the process, again, of making these different ideas. And I'll just ask you to be open-minded to this next idea and project that we did, because I literally just got this footage this morning. This is from a project that we're just opening in Denmark at the Aarhus Museum, if you know it. It's this one. It has this incredible piece by Olafur Eliasson on the top of it. If you don't know him as an artist, definitely he's one of my favorites, called Your Rainbow Horizon. As you walk through it, it gives you the incredible array of different colors filtering through the city itself. On the top of that artwork, you will find occasionally this man. This is Erlend Hyerston. He's the director of Aarhus. And I have absolutely no reservation saying he's maybe about 20 to 30% completely insane. The man is a genius. He's an incredibly inspiring figure. You can see here he went to the top of his own museum to get a picture of him to talk about global warming and climate change. He has an activist heart, but he really speaks and thinks like a poet. Now, he came to us, having seen our work with Cooper-Hewitt, which I'll show you in a second, and he gave me a bunch of sort of talking point Zen overview poems, you might call them. And I'm not making this up. I actually had to go back to my notes so that I could quote exactly what it is that he said. You can see his skull earring here. He looks like a roadie from Motorhead. He's like, got this crazy hair and earrings, but he talks very softly. So these are direct quotes for you. He said, okay, a perfect museum, that's what we need to build. It's the friend that you want to spend time with. It sometimes talks and sometimes listens. It's sometimes funny. It makes you better. He said, I want Aros to be a place where we can be playful, trusting the value of what we're doing. We talk about Aros as a mental fitness center. At first you start with light weights, and then you go to heavier experiences, and so on. You want to strive to be better. Many museums in Scandinavia have been run by former generations, and they're very afraid to take value stands. They experienced Nazi Germany, Soviet Union. They say art shouldn't have a social effect, but now we think you can take a stand. You have to talk to the broader public. And then lastly, he said about technology, he said, it would be interesting to use this tool in a very precise way. How can we use this tool to become a body experience? Don't just do what a book can do, but what is unique to this tool? When we do a Monet experience, they're standing in front of a unique painting, and they say, no one else has this. Can you make me something like that? Okay? That was my brief, and I'm not kidding you. Not only did he say that once, I took him out again, and he said exactly the same thing. Like he had complete intention to have exactly that type of an experience. So we spent time boiling down exactly what that might mean. Okay, a mental fitness center, make the museum a more social space. We want to provoke conversation, connect art themes to visitors' lives, etc. This is our strategy process. We take time to really position the project from the beginning. What is success? When you see people who are participating, debating, and sharing, when you get press beyond the art section, when you have a visual spectacle, then we know we've done our job right. We also define what it isn't, right? It's not art history. It's not recommendations about other art. It's not simplistic yes and no polling. We spent a lot of time sort of going through what is it and what is it not, just to define the playing field to then generate ideas. And we generated a lot of ideas. This was one concept where you would essentially go into this sort of open dichroic bubble, and we would use a headset to understand how your brain changed before and after looking at art. We said, well, what if there was a theater and you went in and you were able to say the first word that popped into your head as you saw an artwork, and then curators could basically take that word and shuttle it across different artworks. We said, what if we had like a big sculpture and we were looking at different media spaces, but you could see both yourself in it and your friends in it at the same time, essentially authoring a new artwork with all these different people? We said, what if you looked at virtual reality and could actually see artworks that weren't there? And you could author them. You could author your own version of the museum, sort of curate it on the fly, and put together these challenging questions with your own opinions, with your own artworks, and constantly curate and recurate the space. We say, well, what if you looked at eye detection? This is super interesting, just that men and women look at artworks differently, that you can essentially trace how someone looks at an artwork. And maybe we could find a way to essentially reveal that artwork to you and reveal yourself to yourself. Right? That's just a big explosion of lots of ideas. That's how we begin typically. And the one that I'm going to walk you through is one that we actually produced. Because to be frank, almost all of those ended up on the cutting room floor. The way that we work is not incredibly efficient, but we feel that it's effective, meaning you come up with lots of ideas, you converse, you challenge, you evolve, you throw away, and then you keep going and refine and learn from the ones that you like. This idea we called Looking Glass. We were really inspired both by new technologies, you can see in the lower left and right, this idea of clear LCDs. I'll show you that in just a second. But also the art history aspect, the fact that art at its whole is about making this human relationship when you're developing a portrait. And we thought to ourselves, well, what would it look like if you could have a clear LCD screen where people are making portraits of each other, but then you could literally hang those portraits up above? This is some of the earliest ideas. First the thing we said, you're going to stare at your companion for 60 seconds. We're going to have this moment of sort of mind meld communion. And once you've done that, you can either draw on top of here to understand the person and actually build a portrait, or you can grab different artworks from the collection and actually collage together a portrait, including these amazing quotes that we were interested in putting in there as well. This is some of the early physical design explorations. Again, this is just to create the playing field that you then converse and prototype your way into a final project. And it's important that you're exploring all these different avenues as opposed to narrowing in advance. If you have a smart, engaged client, the best thing you can do is give a wide array of different options and converse and actually narrow it down with them. We were really excited about this idea, that you could actually print out your poster, and you could imagine all these kids from school trips coming back with their posters, putting it up on the wall, and sharing that in the future. We spend specifically time to go through exactly what these connections are going to be like, and this was the first piece of software we made. So I was really excited about this idea that we would essentially be able to gather together through facial detection and other types of software the actual artworks themselves and overlay them on top. You can see as people are moving, they're actually getting all of these new hands put on top of them. This is a good example, I think, of an amazing idea that's actually really counterproductive and doesn't end up working. Can you see what's happening here? So this is this clear LCD screen, right? And you have the two people, but they're not actually really interacting with each other, right? They're not making the social connection. They're not actually living up to what our original goals were. So we evolved the approach. This is the next version, where essentially one person stands in the front, and they get a picture taken, and then they work together to create the portrait. And it builds that social bond, which is exactly what we were looking for from the beginning. This is just some of the collateral that we ended up developing. You can get a sense of exactly how we were trying to essentially explain this both in English and in Danish to everybody. Nonverbal communication, just sharing exactly what people are going to be doing. And once we got into this stuff, and in particular into this stuff, we started thinking, well, that's really beautiful, right? We have a shot here of making something really beautiful and allowing the visitor to be the author. We've created an armature for their own expression, and that was really exciting to us in terms of just the visuals that could be created. Here's from the opening. Again, this is literally from 2 nights ago. But you get a sense, right? So here he is, having stood and posed and enjoying a laugh with his friends, understanding exactly what it is that they created together. And once you're going through this gallery, you see over and over again these people having just an unbelievable amount of fun. And essentially, they're taking the collection and they're making something out of it. And that is, I think, the most exciting part of this, is that, again, this is the goal, right? These two girls playing together are using the artwork to express and to create that relationship. Now, the second project I wanted to talk about has to do with essentially holding on to an idea, right? Anyone know what this is? Does this strike a bell for anyone? Any guesses? Anyone? So this is the first microscope. And we were inspired by this idea of having sort of extrasensory vision when we started thinking about an educational project that we used for the Gates Foundation. They asked us to essentially look at ways in which the smartphone and its sensors could help kids understand physics and math. We took that concept and we started thinking, you know what's interesting is playgrounds, because playgrounds obviously are used for kids and play, but they're also, weirdly enough, almost like physics machines, right? Like they have acceleration and mass, they have momentum, all built and embedded inside of it. So we said, well, what if we made like a sensor kit and we could allow people to use like a slide and they could measure the acceleration inside of their play. So we had these mats and we had these iPads, we had all this infrastructure. We built it out as a prototype and we were partnering with the client just like we always want to. And we started watching as the kids were playing. And sure enough, you know, the slide was fun. They went down and they were getting real data out of it, and that was very, very exciting. The challenge was the system that we had built was really constraining. It would only allow kids to go on the slide, and they would need another sensor kit to go on the swings, or another sensor kit to go on the jungle gym. And what we ended up realizing was, hold on, we had this great idea. We want to reveal physics and math through kids playing, and then we built a system to express that, and the system didn't actually fulfill the idea. And so instead what we did was we went back, we threw away all that work, which is incredibly painful, but we built a secondary system that essentially uses video capture to express and enact the exact same idea. So you can essentially drag any video file and actually extract the acceleration and momentum out of it. The key for us, again, is that what is virtual here, the sort of information and the learning on top of it, that gets built through two people. That's something where people are sharing and they're making something together. And we love the idea of technology that requires a friend. In this case, what's happening is that they're essentially extracting all of the science and the math inside of the activities they just did. And when you see kids playing with this, they love it because they can use it for anything. And that's the key to the platform, is that we let go of a lot of the specifics that were embedded inside of the way that the kids were using it previously. Right? The sensor kit was very, very exact, but very narrow. We said, let's just make a broader platform. The math won't be as exact. The sensors won't be as exact. But what you'll get is kids being able to express themselves in any way they want. And that's what happens when you hold on to that idea, even in the face of having invested in another piece of technology. Now, the last project I'm going to share with you is about letting go. This is for the Cooper-Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. And what's amazing about this project is that we were asked, in partnership with Dillis Fried and Renfro, who did the architecture, to look at how to engage visitors with the idea of design, but in particular non-designers. The museum understood they needed to grow their visitation besides, essentially folks like us who already understand the vocabulary and might already be designers. And so we said to the museum, well, what would happen if we gave every visitor a pen? It would be a magic pen. It would be a pen that would allow you to collect inspiration and actually create things. And then also, that would make you want to learn more from designers themselves. Essentially, again, learning by doing and inspiring visitors to actually be designers themselves. So this is the final pen. We developed it with GE and Undercurrent, Make Simply. And what can you do with this pen? Well, here's some examples. You can draw a line, and an artwork from the collection with exactly the same line in it will come forward. And we love this idea of serendipity, the fact that it has the history of the line inside of it. And it makes the collection accessible even to a child who's just using it, trying out new lines and trying out new experiences. We were really interested in the ways in which you could not just find objects from other collectors or designers, but you could use those objects then as inspiration for your own design. So that, again, the director in this case said, we need tools that can work for, yes, the Starchitects, the Frank Gehry's of the world who come to our museum, but also for 4-year-olds, which seemed insurmountably challenging. And we made a bunch of tools that were failures and that ended up in the wreckage. And she said to me, look, we're just going to cut the tool making. We've seen enough. We understand it's too hard a problem. We'll try something else. And then one of our developers came up with this idea. Well, what if we just did a single line? So in this case, it's a revolve tool that essentially allows you to both change the shape, just simple, single line, and then also to change the materials and to revolve around it. So this sort of unlocks something to us about how narrow and simple we could make a tool that would allow us for anybody to use it and still to have it be delightful. And then we say, well, what if we could actually make a pattern machine, like a pattern wallpaper room, where visitors could literally draw on the wall? I mean, if you think about it, what museum in the world, besides the Cooper-Hewitt, should be breaking the rules that far to say, it's every museum's nightmare. The visitors are drawing on the wall, and we're going to invite them to do it. And not only that, but they can take the product with them. Maybe they can print out a bag or a piece of that wallpaper. And sure enough, the museum was really anxious about that. And sure enough, we built a prototype. But in this case, the prototype went exceptionally well. And suddenly all the curators were like, wow, can I put my material in here? Can I use this to express my ideas? It suddenly became this incredible medium, not just for the visitors to create their own wallpaper, but to explain what it was like to work in at Knoll in the 1950s, and to understand the inspirations that those designers were using when they were creating those historic wallpapers. We wanted an interface that felt almost like you were interning with some of the world's greatest designers as you use this interface to create the wallpaper. And so this is what the final room looks like. You can both look at historic pieces as well as create your own. And now I'll just walk through the basic museum itself. The museum opened about 1.5 years ago. One thing that the museum was really worried about was if people would even use the pen. 99% of the people actually use the pen. And more importantly, 30% of visitors go back after their visit and retrieve what they created or what they gathered. And that's completely new. Visitors have never done that before. Any museum that's tried this has gotten into single digits before, but breaking into double digits, much less a third, is just unprecedented. And we think it's because people are making and creating and gathering the things that they love. So of course they want to return to them. It's on their terms. It's the things that they care about. So you can go throughout the galleries. Anything that you have, anything you're interested in, you just turn the pen around and you can gather it, and it'll be there later. I've had lots of designers say, this is awesome. I don't have to take all these pictures with my phone and try and manage it. Here's the line machine. So essentially you can design furniture, you can design architecture, you can design fashion, and all of it, again, gets saved to your account, and you can share it later, or you can position it in different ways with other people. A lot of the galleries are made, again, to create these types of social interactions. So we have this performative space. One thing that we realized in conversation with the curators was so much of design is in reference to the human body. And so maybe we should just make a sort of human machine where you can browse the collection literally by just making different gestures and seeing it embedded inside of here. And so as people are making those faces, they're able to share them. And lastly, this is the wallpaper room. And the amazing part about this is the ways in which it appears in social media. So they create these different challenges. And different people come here all the time and are making and creating their own work. There have been literally 750,000 objects that have been saved and 50,000 objects that have been designed. And that just grows every day, constantly in social media. You're seeing these incredibly complex, amazing patterns that visitors are coming up with. And the most incredible part to me is how, again, this process that we've outlined gets repeated every day over and over again by different visitors, right? They come into this room, they have an idea, they do their homework, they make an idea, they start working with it, they test it, they erase things, they change things, they hold on to it, even as the world works against them or works against all of us as designers. They nurture those ideas and they care for them just like we do every day with our work. And when they finally have the chance to actually release it with the world, that's the most important part, because they let it go and they allow people to essentially take that idea and to do things with it that they never, ever would have imagined. And with that, I'll say thank you very much.